Welcome to the Methodology Institute's SPSS video tutorial series, sponsored by the LSE Annual Fund. In this tutorial, I'm going to demonstrate how to create new variables and enter data into a blank dataset in SPSS. And so for the purposes of this example, I've chosen to recreate three of the variables from our demonstration dataset. A variable to record respondents' gender, a variable to record respondents' age, and a variable to record whether or not respondents intend to vote at the next general election. We'll begin in variable view, and the first thing we need to do is enter a name for our three variables. And to do this, just double-click in the name column for the first row and type in the variable name gender. And then double-click on the variable name for the second row and type in age. And finally, for the third row, type in vote. Secondly, we need to enter labels for each of our three variables. And so to do this, we begin by double-clicking on the label column for our first row and typing in the label respondent's gender. And we can then double-click in the label column for the second row and type in respondent's age brackets in years. And lastly, for the third row, we need to type in the label, do you intend to vote at the next general election? And so the next step will be to enter value labels for our categorical variables. And so for our first variable, gender, we need to click on the right-hand side of the box in the values column. And we can then enter a numeric value or code of 0, which we'll use to represent female respondents in our dataset. And once we've typed in our value and our label, we then need to click on the Add button. And then secondly, we're going to enter the value of 1 to represent male respondents in our dataset. And then just select OK to proceed. And we'll also need to specify value labels for our third variable, vote. And we'll use a code of 0 for those respondents who stated that no, they did not intend to vote at the next general election. We will then use a code of 1 for those respondents who answered yes, and a code of -9 for those respondents who answered that they didn't know whether or not they would vote. And so once we've added all three value labels to the list, we can click OK to proceed. And we're then going to use the missing values feature in order to exclude respondents from our analysis who answered don't know for the third variable. And to do this, we click on the right-hand side of the missing box for the vote variable. And then in the discrete missing values box, enter the value label for don't know responses, which was -9. And then click OK to proceed. And the next step will be to select the correct type of measure for each of our three variables. And so under the drop-down menu in the measure column, we need to select nominal for our variables gender and vote. And lastly, since values for all three of our new variables will be recorded as whole numbers, I suggest changing the value in the decimals column to 0 for each of the three variables. And we've now finished setting up our three new variables in variable view, and so we can then select the tab at the bottom of the screen to move across into data view. Okay, so I'm now going to demonstrate the process for entering data based on the characteristics of three hypothetical respondents. And so our first respondent is male, and we specified a value label or code for male respondents of 1. So under the gender column in the first row, we'll enter the value 1. We can then enter our first respondent's age, which was 49. And this respondent did intend to vote in the next election, so we can enter the value of 1 in the vote column. And we can then repeat this process for our second respondent, who was a woman, age 65, who did not intend to vote in the next election. And our last respondent was a man, aged 18, who responded that he didn't know when asked whether or not he would vote in the next election. And so when entering data into SPSS, we would simply repeat this process for every respondent in our dataset. Okay, so that concludes this tutorial in which I've demonstrated how to create new variables and then how to enter data into SPSS.